Now that we know all about it.
And I will be listening, so there are training wheels in this case.
Behave.
Okay. So, thank you for joining us. Anybody who might be watching us on YouTube live video. In this video, we are going to continue reading Stephen Hero, and we are on chapter 24. And when I post this officially after the meeting's over and all that, I'll make a few notes of where you can find the text, etc. And with that, I will turn it over to Ann Doyle.
Okay.
There you go. And I am going to go back to bed.
Perfect. You go to bed.
But I'll be listening.
Thank you, Duncan. You're very good.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, will I start? Okay. About this time, there was some agitation in the political world concerning the work of the Royal University. It was proposed to institute a commission to examine into the matter. The Jesuits were accused of working the machine for their own ends without a just sense of impartiality. To parry the charge of obscurantism, a monthly review was started under the editorship of McCann. The new editor was in high spirits over this event. I have got nearly all the copy for the first number, he said to Stephen. I'm sure it will be a success. I want you to write us something for the second number, but something we can understand. Condescend a little. You can't say we are barbarians now. We have a paper of our own. We can express our views. You will write us something, won't you? We have an article by use in this month. Of course there is a censor, said Stephen. Well, said McCann, the person who originated the idea of the paper in the first instance was Father Cummins, the director of your sodality. Yes, he originated the ideas, so you see he acts as a kind of sponsor to us. He is the censor then. He has discretionary powers, but he is not at all narrow-minded. You needn't be afraid of him. I see. And tell me, will I be paid? I thought you were an idealist, said McCann. Good luck to the paper, said Stephen, waving his hand in adieu. Next, please.
First number of McCann's paper contained a long article by Hughes on the future of the Celt. It contained also an article in Irish by Glyn's sister and an editorial article by McCann, in which was narrated the history of the inception of the paper. The article began, it was happy thought of the director of her sodality to unite the various elements of her college life by affording them the opportunity of interchanging ideas and criticisms through the medium of the university magazine. Thanks to the zeal and enterprise of Father Cummins, the initial difficulties have been surmounted, and we make our bow to the public in the expectation that the public will give us a hearing. The paper also contains several pages of notes from various sporting and intellectual societies, in which celebrities were chaffed under the thin disguise of their Latinized surnames. The medical memos, which were signed H2O, consisted of several congratulatory paragraphs about medicos who had passed their final examinations, and a few complimentary paragraphs about the genial professors of the medical school. The paper also contained some verses, The Female Fellow, A Swallow Flight of Song, which were signed Toga Gerlis. Stephen was shown the new review in the library by the Cranley, who seemed to have read it from the first line to the last. Cranley took his friend from one item to another with great persistence, paying no heed to Stephen's exclamations of impatience. At the medical memo, Stephen execrated with such smothered fervour that Cranley began to laugh between the pages of the paper, and a red-faced priest who was sitting opposite stared indignantly across his copy of the tablet. In the porch of the library were a little knot of young men and a little knot of young women, all provided with copies of the new review. All were laughing and talking, making the rain an excuse for lingering under shelter. McCann, brisk and heated with his cycling cap sideways on his head, went to and fro between the groups. When he saw Stephen, he approached him with an air of expectancy. "Well, have you seen? It's a great day for Ireland," said Stephen, seizing the editor's hand and shaking it gravely. "Well, it is something," said McCann, with a suffused forehead. Next.
Stephen leaned against one of the stone pillars and regarded the farther group. She stood in a ring of her companions, laughing and talking with them. The anger with which the new review had filled him gradually ebbed away, and he chose to contemplate the spectacle which she and her companions offered him. As on his entrance into the grounds of Clonliffe College, a sudden sympathy arose out of a sudden reminiscence, a reminiscent sympathy towards a protected seminarist life, the very virtues of which seemed to be set provokingly before the wild gaze of the world, so provokingly that only the strength of walls and watchdogs held them in a little circle of modish and timid ways. Though their affections often lacked grace, and their vulgarity wanted only lungs to be strident, the rain brought him charity. The babble of the young students reached him, as if from a distance, in broken pulsations, and lifting his eyes, he saw the high rain clouds retreating across the rain-swept country. The quick, light shower was over, tarrying a cluster of diamonds among the shrubs of the quadrangle, where an exhalation ascended from the blackened earth. The company in the colonnade was leaving shelter. With many a doubting glance, with a prattle of trim boots, a pretty rescue of petticoats under umbrellas in light armory upheld at cunning angles, he saw them returning to the convent, demure corridors and simple dormitories, a quiet rosary of hours, while the rain clouds retreated towards the west, and the babble of the young men reached him in regular pulsations. He saw far away, amid a flat, rain-swept country, a high, plain building with windows that filtered the obscure daylight. 300 boys, noisy and hungry, sat at long tables eating beef, fringed with green fat like blubber, and chunks of white, damp bread. And one young boy, leaning on his elbows, opened and closed the flaps of his ears, while the noise of the diners reached him rhythmically as the wild gabble of animals. Donna.
"There should be an art of gesture," said Stephen one night to Cranley. "Yes? Of course, I don't mean art of gesture in the sense that the elocution professor understands the word. For him, a gesture is an emphasis. I mean a rhythm. You know the song, 'Come unto these yellow stands'?" "No. This is it," said the youth, making a graceful anapaestic gesture with each arm. "That's the rhythm. Do you see? Yes. I would like to go out into Grafton Street someday and make gestures in the middle of the street. I'd like to see that. There is no reason why life should lose all grace and nobility, even though Columbus discovered America. I will live a free and noble life. Yes? My art will proceed from a free and noble source. It is too troublesome for me to adopt the manners of these slaves. I refuse to be terrorized into stupidity. Do you believe that one line of verse can immortalize a man? Or why not one word? Sitio is a classical cry. Try to improve upon it. Do you think that Jesus, when he hung on the cross, appreciated that you would call the rhythm of that remark? Do you think that Shakespeare, when he wrote a song, went out into the street to make gestures for the people? It is evident that Jesus was unable to illustrate his remark by a correspondingly magnificent gesture, but I do not imagine he uttered it in a matter-of-fact voice. Jesus had a very pure, tragic manner. His conduct during his trial was admirable. Do you imagine the church could have erected such elaborately artistic sacraments about his legend unless the original figure had been one of certain tragic majesty? And Shakespeare, I don't believe he wanted to go out into the street, but I am sure he appreciated his own music. I don't believe that beauty is fortuitous. A man might think for 7 years at intervals and all at once write a quatrain which would immortalize him seemingly without thought or care, seemingly. Then the groundling will say, oh, he could write poetry. And if I ask, how is that? The groundling will answer, well, he just wrote it. That's all. Next, please.
In my opinion, you imagine all this about rhythm and gesture. A poet, according to you, is a terribly mixed up fellow. The reason you say that is because you have never seen a poet in action before. How do you know that? You think my theorizing very high flown and fantastical, don't you? Yes, I do. Well, I tell you, you think me fantastical simply because I am modern. My dear man, that's rubbish. You're always talking about modern. Have you any idea of the age of the earth? You say you're emancipated, but in my opinion, you haven't got beyond the first book of Genesis yet. There is such a thing as a modern. There is no such thing as a modern or ancient. It's all the same. What's all the same? Ancient and modern. Oh, yes, I know everything is the same as everything else. Of course, I know the word modern is only a word, but when I use it with a certain meaning. What do you mean, for instance? The modern spirit is vivisective. Vivisection itself is the most modern process one can conceive. The ancient spirit accepted phenomena with a bad grace. The ancient method investigated law with the lantern of justice, morality with the lantern of revelation, art with the lantern of tradition. But all these lanterns have magical properties. They transform and disfigure. The modern method examines its territory by the light of day. Italy had added a science to civilization by putting out the lantern of justice and considering the criminal in production and in action. All modern political and religious criticism dispenses with presumptive states, presumptive redeemers, and churches. It examines the entire community in action and reconstructs the spectacle of redemption. If you were an aesthetic philosopher, you would take note of all my vagaries, because here you have the spectacle of the aesthetic instinct in motion. The Philosophic College should spare a detective for me. Next.
Katrina, you're
All
on
right.
mute.
Yeah. All right. I suppose you know that Aristotle founded the science of biology. I would not say a word against Aristotle for the world, but I think his spirit would hardly do itself justice in treating the inexact sciences. I wonder what Aristotle would have thought of you as a poet. I'm damned if I would apologize to him at all. Let him examine me if he is able. Can you imagine a handsome lady saying, "Oh, excuse me, my dear Aristotle, for being so beautiful"? He was a very wise man. Yes, but I do not think he is a special patron of those who proclaim the usefulness of the stationary march. What do you mean? Have you noticed that a false and unreal sound abstract have you noticed what a false and unreal sound abstract terms have on the lips of those ancients in the college? You see what talk they have now about their new paper. McCann is supposed to lead them out of captivity. Doesn't that paper of theirs make you say to yourself, "Oh Lord, I'm glad I had no hand in this"? The toy life which the Jesuits permit these docile young men to live is what I call the stationary march. The marionette life which the Jesuit himself lives is a dispenser of illumination and rectitude, is another variety of the stationary march. And yet both these classes of puppets think that Aristotle has apologized for them before the eyes of the world. Kindly remember the monstrous legend upon which all their life is regulated. How Aristotelian it is. Kindly remember the minute bylaws they have for estimating the exact amount of salvation in any good work. What an Aristotelian invention. Next, please.
Oh,
A week or so before Christmas, Stephen was standing one night in the porch of the library when Emma came out. She stopped to talk with him. She was dressed cozily in warm tweeds, and the long, even coils of her white boa presented her smiling face to the wintry air. Any young man of reasonable sanity, seeing so happy and so glowing a figure in a cheerless landscape, would have longed to take it in his arms. She wore a little brown fur cap, which made her look like a Christmas doll, and her incorrigible eyes seemed to say, "Wouldn't you like to fondle me?" She began to chatter at once. She knew the girl that had written The Female Fellow, an awfully smart girl at that kind of thing. They had a magazine in her convent, too. She wrote skits for it. "By the way, I hear dreadful things about you." "How is that?" "Everyone says you have dreadful ideas, that you read." Sorry, my pages stuck together. "That you read dreadful books. You're a mystic or something. Do you know what I heard a girl say?" "No, what?" "That you didn't believe in God." They were walking along the green inside the chains, and as she said this, she gave more of her body's warmth to him, and her eyes looked at him with an expression of solicitude. Stephen looked into them steadfastly. "Never mind God, Emma," he said. "You interest me much more than that old gentleman does." "What gentleman?" said Emma frankly. "The middle-aged gentleman with the aviary, Jehovah II. "You must not say such things to me. I told you that before." "Very good, Emma. I see you are afraid you will lose the faith, but you needn't be afraid of my influence." They walked from the green as far as the South Circular Road without an attempt at further conversation. At every step that they took, Stephen's resolution to leave her and see no more of her became more deeply rooted. Even as a diversion, her company was slightly degrading to his sense of dignity. As they passed under the tall trees of the mall, she slackened her pace, and when safe from the lights of the bridge, halted deliberately. Stephen was very much surprised, as the hour and the place made their position equivocal, and though she had chosen the broad shadow of the trees to halt in, she had committed this audacity in sight of her own house. They listened for a moment to the quiet flowing of the water and saw the tram begin to crawl off the apex of the bridge. Next, please.
"Do I interest you so much as that?" she said, speaking at last in a rich, significant voice. "Of course you do," said Stephen, trying to match her tone. "I know that you are alive and human, but as many people are alive. You are a woman, Emma. Would you call me a woman now? Don't you think I am still a girl?" Stephen's gaze traversed the provoking territory for a few moments, during which her half-closed eyes suffered the trespass without remonstrating. "No, Emma," he said, "you are not a girl any longer." "But you are not a man, are you?" she said quickly, for pride and youth and desire were beginning to inflame her cheek even in the shadow. "I am a hobbledehoy," said Stephen. She leaned a little more toward him, and the same expression of tender solicitude appeared in her eyes. The warmth of her body seemed to flow into his, and without a moment's hesitation, he put his hand into his pocket and began to finger out his coins. "I must be going in," she said. "Good night," said Stephen, smiling. When she had gone in, he went along the canal bank, still in the shadow of the leafless trees, humming to himself the chant of the Good Friday Gospel. He thought of what he had said to Cranley, that when people love, they give, and he said aloud, "I will never speak to her again." And he came near the lower bridge. A woman emerged from the shadow and said, "Good night, love." Stephen stood still and looked at her. She was an undersized woman, and even in that chilly season, her clothes gave off an odor of ancient sweats. The black straw hat was set rakishly above her glazed face. She asked him to come for a little walk. Stephen did not speak to her, but still humming the chant of the Passion, transferred his coins to her hand and continued on his way. Next, please.
He heard her benedictions at his back as he walked, and he began to wonder which was better from the literary point of view, Renan's account of the death of Jesus or the account given by the evangelists. He had once heard a preacher allude in horrified piety to the theory put forward by some literary agent of the devil that Jesus was a maniac. The woman in the black straw hat would never believe that Jesus was a maniac, and Stephen shared her opinion. He is certainly a great exemplar for bachelors, he said to himself, but he is a little too careful of himself for a divine person. The woman in the black straw hat has never heard of the name of Buddha, but Buddha's character seems to have been superior to that of Jesus with respect to unaffected sanctity. I wonder how she would like that story of Yasodhara's kissing Buddha after his illumination and penance. Renan's Jesus is a trifle Buddhistic, but the fierce eaters and drinkers of the Western world would never worship such a figure. Blood will have blood. There are some people in this island who sing a hymn called Washed in the Blood of the Lamb by way of easing the religious impulse. Perhaps it's a question of impulse diet, but I would prefer to wash in rice water. Yow, what a notion. A bloodbath to cleanse the spiritual body of all its sinful sweats. The sense of decorum makes that woman wear a black straw hat in midwinter. She said to me, "Good night, love." The greatest lover of all time could not say more than that. Think of it. Good night, love. Mustn't the devil be annoyed to hear her described as an evil creature? "I am not going to see her any more," said Stephen a few nights later to Lynch. "That is a great mistake," said Lynch, expanding his chest. "It's only a waste of time. I'll never get what I want from her." "And what do you want from her?" "Love." Love. Lynch halted abruptly, saying, "Look here, I have 4 pence. You have? Let us go somewhere. But if I give you a drink, you must promise not to say any more." "Say what?" "That word. Love, is it?" Next.
Let us go in there. When they were sitting in the squalid gloom of a tavern, Stephen began to rock his stool from leg to leg meditatively. "I see I've educated you too much, my good Lynch." "But that was atrocity," said Lynch, enjoying the luxury of entertaining and reworking his companion. "You do not believe me?" "Of course not." Stephen concerned himself with his pewter measure for a little time. "Of course," he said at last, "I would take something less if she would give it to me." "Oh, I know you would. Would you like me to seduce her?" "Very much. It would be very interesting." "Ah, wouldn't be possible." Lynch laughed. "The sorrow-stricken tone you say that in. I wish McCann could hear you." "You know, Lynch," said Stephen, "we may as well acknowledge openly and freely. We must have women." "Yes, I agree. We must have women. Jesus said, Whoso looketh upon a woman to lust after her hath already committed adultery with her in his heart." But he did not condemn adultery. Besides, it's impossible not to commit adultery. Quite impossible. Consequently, if I see a woman inclined for oracle, I go to her. If she has no inclination, I stay away. But that girl has an inclination for oracle. That's the tantalizing part of it. I know she has. It's very unfair of her to tantalize me. I must go to where I am sure of my ground. Next, please.
But that costs money, and besides, it is dangerous. You may get a dose that will last you your life. I wonder you have not got it before this. Ah, yes, isn't it a nuisance? And yet I must go somewhere. She's a human being, you know. I can't say I consider harlots as human beings. Scortum and mucus are both neuter nouns. Of course, a human being will be much better, but you could get her if you liked. How? In marriage. I'm glad you reminded me of that, said Stephen. I was almost forgetting it. You may be sure she doesn't forget it, said Lynch, or let anyone else forget it either. Stephen sighed. You remembered in the adoration of the Magi when the immortals wished to overthrow the things that are today and to bring the tidings that were yesterday. They have no one to help them except one whom the things that are today have cast out. Yes. Who have I to help me except a woman in black straw hat? And yet I wish to bring to the world, the spiritual renewal which the poet brings to it. No, I have decided. I will not see her anymore. The woman in this black straw hat? No, the Virgin. Still, I think you are making a mistake, said Lynch, finishing his pint. One raw, misty morning after Christmas, Stephen was reading Oreste in Father Artefoni's bedroom. He asked questions mechanically and listened to answers mechanically. He devised the following question and answer for the pseudo-classical catechism. Question: what great truth do we learn from the libation pourers of Aeschylus? Answer: we learn from the libation pourers of Aeschylus that in ancient Greece, brothers and sisters took the same size in boots. Next.
He looked warily from the wretched Italian binding of his book towards the desolate gardens of St. Stephen's Green. Above him and beneath him and around him in little dark dusty rooms, the intellectual heart of Ireland was throbbing. Young men were engaged in the pursuit of learning. Above and beneath and around him were posted Jesuits to guide the young men amid the perilous ways of knowledge. The hand of Jesuit authority was laid firmly upon that intellectual heart, and if at times it bore too heavily thereon, what a little cross that was. The young men were sensible that such severity had its reasons. They understood it as an evidence of watchful care and interest, assured that in their future lives this care would continue, this interest would be maintained. The exercise of authority might be sometimes questionable, its intention never. Who, therefore, readier than these young men to acknowledge gratefully the sallies of some genial professor or the surliness of some door porter? Who more solicitous to cherish in every way and to advance in the person the honor of alma mater? The mortifying atmosphere of the college crept about Stephen's heart. For his part, he was at a difficult age, dispossessed and necessitous, sensible to all that was ignoble in such manners, who, in reverie at last, had been acquainted with nobility. As a remedy for so untoward a malady, an earnest Jesuit had some days before, Jesuit was to prescribe a clerkship in Guinnesses, and doubtless the clerk designate of a brewery would not have had scorn and pity only for an admirable community had it not been that he desired, in the language of the schoolmen, an arduous good. Impossible that he should find his soul's sufficient good in societies for the encouragement of thought among laymen, or any other bodily solace in warm sodality, in the company of those foolish and grotesque virginities. Impossible that a temperament ever trembling towards ecstasy should submit to acquiesce, that a soul should decrease servitude for its portion for which the image of beauty had fallen as a mantle.
The deadly chill of the atmosphere of the college paralyzed Stephen's heart. In a stupor of powerlessness, he reviewed the plague of Catholicism. He seemed to see the vermin begotten in the catacombs in an age of sickness and cruelty, issuing forth upon the plains and mountains of Europe. Footnote: among Joyce's notes, Gorman, page 135, is the phrase catacombs and vermin. Like the plague of locusts described in Callista, they seem to choke the rivers and fill the valleys up. They obscure the sun. Contempt of human nature, weakness, nervous tremblings, fear of day and joy, distrust of man and life, hemiplegia of the will, beset the body, burdened and disaffected in its members by its black tyrannous lice. Again, there's a footnote scrawled in red crayon across this sentence, and the next is the word Gogarty. See illustration. Exaltation of the mind before joyful beauty, exaltation of the body in free confederate labors. Every natural impulse towards health and wisdom and happiness had been corroded by the pest of these vermin. The spectacle of the world in thrall filled him with the fire of courage. He, at least, though living at the farthest remove from the center of European culture, marooned on an island in the ocean, though inheriting a will broken by doubt and a soul, the steadfastness of whose hate became as weak as water in siren arms, would live his own life according to what he recognized as the voice of a new humanity, active, unafraid, and unashamed. He followed his Italian lesson mechanically, feeling the unintermittent deadliness of the atmosphere of the college in his throat and lungs, obscuring his eyes and obfuscating his brain. The little iron watch on the table had barely passed the half hour. 11 o'clock seemed so far off. He had to open his Machiavelli and read out a paragraph until the teacher's ear was satisfied. The dingy chronicle fell piecemeal from his lips, dull wooden words. From time to time he glanced up from the page to see the thick mouth of the priest correct his slovenly's O's, now with a sudden harsh ejaculation of the vowel sound, now with a slow, mute protrusion of the lips. Next please.
The little iron watch ticked on for another 5 minutes. Then the teacher began to correct the exercise. Stephen gazed wearily out of the window across the mist-laden gardens. The air was webbed with water vapors, and all the flower beds and walks confronted the gray of the sky with a truculent, sodden brown. Macintoshes and overcoats came along the walks or down the steps of the monument under their umbrellas or surmounted by a muffled human head. The footpath inside the chains, where Stephen had so often walked with his friends at night, glistened like a gray mirror. Stephen watched the feet pass along the polished surface. He wondered if it was his moments of excessive vitality which cast back my revulsion on such hours of despair. He felt that he was looking at the world with Cranley's eyes, and still he continued gazing along the footpath. "You cannot say," said the teacher, running his pencil under a phrase. "It is not Italian." Stephen withdrew his eyes from the window suddenly and stood up. "Will you please excuse me, sir? I forgot to tell you that today I must go away earlier. I am afraid I shall be late," he added, looking at the watch. "Will you excuse me?" "You have an appointment now?" "Yes, I nearly forgot. You must excuse me for today." Certainly, you can go now." "Thanks. I am afraid Certainly. Next."
With a flying hand for the banisters, he ran down the stairs, taking 5 steps at a time. He struggled into his raincoat in the hall and emerged panting and half-dressed onto the front steps. He ran out into the middle of the muddy roadway and peered through the dull light towards the eastern side of the square. He walked on swiftly in the middle of the road with his eyes fixed on the same point, and then came in again on the footpath and began to run. When he reached the corner of Earlsfort Terrace, he stopped running and, turning to the right, walked on again swiftly. Outside of the university, he came alongside of the object which he had been pursuing. Good morning. Stephen, have you been running? Yes. Where are you going to? I saw you from the window. What window? In the college. Where are you going? I'm going to Leeson Park. This way, said Stephen, taking her arm. She seemed as if she were about to resent such an act in broad daylight, but after a quick glance of remonstrance allowed him to escort her. Stephen held her arm tightly to his side and discomposed her somewhat by speaking very close to her face. Her face was glistening with mist, and it had begun to glow in the answer to his excited, impassionate manner. Where did you see me? I was at the window of my Italian lesson with Father Artifoni. I saw you come through the green and cross the road. Did you? So I jumped up at once and asked him to excuse me, as I had to keep an appointment, and flew down the stairs and out to you. The color began to deepen very much on her cheek, and it was plain that she was trying to appear quite at her ease. At first she had been flattered, but now she was becoming a little nervous. She laughed nervously when he told her that he had run out after her. Goodness, why did you do that? Next, please.
Stephen did not answer her, but pressed her arm fiercely to his side. At the end of the terrace, she turned into a side street instinctively. Here she walked more slowly. The street was very quiet, and they both lowered their voices. How did you know it was I? She said. You must have good sight. I was gazing out the window, he answered, looking at the sky and the green. Lord God, I felt so full of despair. Sometimes I'm taken that way. I live such a strange life, without help or sympathy from anyone. Sometimes I'm afraid of myself. I call those people in the college not men, but vegetables. Then, while I was cursing my own character, I saw you. Yes, she said, looking at the disorderly figure beside her out of her large oval eyes. You know, I was delighted to see you. I had to jump up and rush out. I couldn't have sat there another minute. I said, here is a human creature at last. I can't tell you how delighted I was. You strange boy, she said. You mustn't go running about like that. You must have more sense. Emma, cried Stephen, don't start talking to me like that today. I know you want to be very sensible, but you and I, we are both young, aren't we? Yes, Stephen. Very good, then. If we're young, we feel happy. We feel full of desire. Desire? Do you know, when I saw you? Yes. How did you know me? I knew the stride. Stride? Do you know, Emma, even from my window, I could see your hips moving inside your waterproof. I saw a young woman walking proudly through the decayed city. Yes, that's the way you walk. You're proud of being young and proud of being a woman. Do you know, when I caught sight of you from my window, do you know what I felt? Next, please.
There was no use in her essaying indifference now. Her cheeks were covered with a persistent flush, and her eyes shone like gems. She gazed straight before her, and her breath began to be agitated. They stood together in the deserted street, and he continued speaking, a certain ingenious disattachment guiding his excited passion. I felt that I longed to hold you in my arms. Your body, I longed for you to take me in your arms, that's all. Then I thought I would run after you and say that to you. Just to live one night together, Emma, and then to say goodbye in the morning and never to see each other again. There is no such thing as love in the world. Only people are young. She tried to take her arm away from his and murmured as if she were repeating from memory, You are mad, Stephen. Stephen let go her arm and took her hand in his, saying, Goodbye, Emma. I felt that I wanted to say that to you for my own sake. But if I stand here in this stupid street beside you for much longer, I shall begin to say more. You say I am mad because I do not bargain with you or say I love you or swear to you. But I believe you hear my words and understand me, don't you? I don't understand you indeed, she answered with a touch of anger. Next, please.
I will give you a chance, said Stephen, pressing her hand close in his two hands. Tonight, when you are going to bed, remember me and go to your window. I will be in the garden. Open the window and call my name and ask me to come in. Then come down and let me in. We will live one night together. One night, Emma, alone together. And in the morning, we will say goodbye. Let go my hand, please, she said, pulling her hand away from him. If I had known, if it was for this mad talk, you must not speak to me any more, she said, moving on a pace or two and plucking her waterproof out of his reach. Who do you think I am that you can speak to me like that? It's no insult, said Stephen, coloring suddenly as the adverse of the image struck him. For a man to ask a woman what I have asked you. You are annoyed at something else, not at that. You are mad, I think, she said, brushing past him swiftly, without taking any notice of his salute. She did not go quickly enough, however, to hide the tears that were in her eyes, and he, surprised to see them and wondering at their cause, forgot to say the goodbye that was on his lips. As he watched her walk onward swiftly with her head slightly bowed, he seemed to feel her soul and his falling asunder swiftly, and forever after an instant of all but union. So we're on to chapter 25.
Yep.
Go on.
I would, well, I don't know. I'm not in charge, but we've been
Go
doing
in.
stopping at the end of the episode. But it doesn't matter to me. We've got like 34 pages left. We could
I have to.
Let's
Well,
go.
why don't we do
on.
another
Saved it.
Yeah.
15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
I'll continue. Okay,
Right.
chapter 25. Lynch chuckled very much over this adventure. He said it was the most original attempt at seduction of which he had ever heard, so original that, you know, he said, I must tell you that to the ordinary intelligence, to you, that is, to the ordinary intelligence, it looks as if you had taken leave of your senses for the time being. Stephen stared fixedly at his toes. They were sitting on a bench in the green. It was the best I could do, he said. A very bad best, in my opinion. No girl with an ounce of brains would listen to you. That's not the way to go about it, man. You run out suddenly after her, come up sweating and puffing and say, let us lie together. Did you mean it as a joke? No, I was quite serious. I thought she might. In fact, I don't know what I thought. I saw her, as I told you, and I ran after her and said what was in my mind. We are friends for a long time. Now it seems I have acted like a lunatic. Oh, no, said Lynch,
Absolutely.
expanding his chest. Not like a lunatic, but you went about the affair so strangely. If I had run after her and proposed to her, proposed marriage, that is, you would not say I had acted strangely. No, no, even in that case. No, don't deceive yourself. You would not. You would find an excuse for me. Well, you see, there is something relatively sane about marriage, isn't there? For a man of your ordinary intelligence, there may be, not for me. Have you ever read the form of solemnization of marriage in the Book of Common Prayer? Never. You should then. Your everyday life is Protestant. You show yourself a Catholic only when you discuss. Well, to me, that ceremony is not acceptable. It is not so sane as you imagine. Next.
Okay. A man who swears before the world to love a woman till death part him, and her insane neither in the opinion of the philosopher who understands what mutability is not, in the opinion of the man of the world who understands that it is safer to be a witness than an actor in such affairs. A man who swears to do something which it is not in his power to do is not accounted a sane man. For my part, I do not believe that there was ever a moment of passion so fierce and energetic that it warranted a man in saying, I could love you forever to the adored object. Please understand the importance of Goethe. Still, manage is a custom. To follow a custom is a mark of sanity. It is a mark of ordinariness. I admit that many ordinary people are sane, just as I know that many ordinary people have delusions. But a capacity for being deceived by others or by oneself cannot be said to constitute the essential part of sanity. It is rather a question whether a man does encourage an insane condition in himself by deceiving himself voluntarily or allowing himself to be deceived by others voluntarily. Next, please.
Anyhow, your move was not diplomatic. We all know that, said Stephen, standing up. But all genuine diplomacy is with the view to some particularly excellent plum. What plum do you think Cranley is likely to gain by a diplomacy which is highly meritorious in itself? What plum would I be likely to get by proposing a diplomatic marriage to accept a partner to behold my chaste conversation coupled with fear, eh? The juice of the fruit, answered Lynch, standing up in his turn, looking very thirsty and tired. The woman herself, you mean? Exactly. Stephen walked along the path without saying anything for about 20 yards. Then he said, I like a woman to give herself. I like to receive. These people count it a sin to sell holy things for money, but surely what they call the temple of the Holy Ghost should not be bargained for. Isn't that simony? You want to sell your verses, don't you? Said Lynch abruptly, and to a public you say you despise. I do not want to sell my poetical mind to the public. I expect reward from the public for my verses because I believe my verses are to be numbered among the spiritual assets of the state. That is not a simonical exchange. I do not sell what Glynn calls the divine afflatus. I do not swear to love, honour, and obey the public until my dying day, do I? A woman's body is a corporal asset of the state. If she traffic with it, she must sell it either as a harlot or as a married woman, or as a working celibate or as a mistress. But a woman is, incidentally, a human being, and a human being's love and freedom is not a spiritual asset of the state. Can the state buy and sell electricity? It is not possible. Simony is monstrous because it revolts our notion of what is humanly possible. A human being can exert freedom to produce or accept, or love to procreate or to satisfy. Love gives freedom and love gives and freedom takes. The woman in the black straw hat gave something before she sold her body to the state. Emma will sell herself to the state, but give nothing. You know, even if you had proposed to buy her decently for state purposes, said Lynch, kicking his toes moodily at the gravel, she would not have sold at the price. You think not? Not even if I? Not likely, said the other definitely. What a damn fool she is. Next.
Stephen blushed ingenuously. You've such a nice way of putting things, he said. The next time Stephen met Emma in the street, she did not salute him. He did not tell the incident to anyone but Lynch. From Cranley, he expected scant sympathy, and he was deterred from speaking of it to Morris because he had still the elder brother's wish to appear successful. The conversation with Lynch had revealed to him with distressing effect the commonplace side of the adventure. He asked himself seriously and often, had he expected that she would have answered yes to his proposal? His mind, he thought, must have been somewhat unbalanced that morning. And yet, when he reconsidered his own defense of his conduct, he found it just. The economic aspect of the affair did not present itself to him very vividly, and indeed was only vivid enough to make him deplore the fact that the solution of moral problems could be so hopelessly entangled with merely material considerations. He was not sufficiently doctrinaire to wish to have his theory put to the test by a general revolution of society, but he could not believe that his theory was utterly impracticable. Roman Catholic notion that a man should be unswervingly continent from his boyhood and then be permitted to achieve his male nature, having first satisfied the church as to his orthodoxy, financial condition, prospects, and general intentions, and having sworn before witnesses to love his wife forever, whether he loved her or not, and to beget children for the kingdom of heaven in such manner as the church approved of. This notion seemed to him by no means satisfactory. Don't I?
During the train of these reflections, the church sent an embassy of nimble pleaders into his ears. These ambassadors were of all grades and of all types of culture. They addressed every side of his nature in turn. He was a young man with a doubtful future and an unusual character. This was the first salient fact. The ambassadors met it without undue pretense or haste. They stated that it was in their power to make smooth many of the ways which promised to be rough, and by diminishing the hardships of the material nature, to allow the unusual character scope and ease to develop and approve itself. He had deplored the entanglement of merely material considerations in a problem of morals, and here at least was a warrant that if he chose to give ear to the pleadings of the embassy, the moral problem in his case would be set on the road to solving itself free from minor and unworthier cares. He had what he called a modern reluctance to give pledges. No pledges were required. If at the end of 5 years he still persevered in his obduracy of heart, he could still seize upon his individual liberty without fear of being called oathbreaker, therefore. The practice of due consideration was an old one and a wise one. He himself was the greatest skeptic concerning the perfervid enthusiasms of the patriots. As an artist, he had nothing but contempt for a work which had arisen out of any but the most stable mood of the mind. Was it possible that he would exercise less vigor on his life than he desired to exercise on his art? How could he be guilty of such foolishness, of such cynical subordination of the actual to the abstract? If he honestly believed that an institution is to be accounted valuable in proportion to its nearness to some actual human need or energy, and that the epithet vivisective should be applied to the modern spirit as distinguished from an ancient or category burdened spirit. He desired for himself the life of an artist. Well, and he feared that the church would obstruct his desire. Next, please.
But during the formulation of his artistic creed, he had not found item after item, upheld for him in advance by the greatest and most orthodox church doctor of the church. And was it anything but vanity which urged him to seek out the thorny crown of the heretic, while the entire theory, in accordance with which his entire artistic life was shaped, arose most conveniently for his purpose out of the mass of Catholic theology? He could not accept wholeheartedly the offers of Protestant belief. He knew that the liberty it boasted of was often only the liberty to be slovenly in thought and amorphous in ritual. No one, not the most rabid enemy of the church, could accuse it of being slovenly in thought. The subtlety of its disquisitions had become a byword with demagogues. No one again could accuse the church of being amorphous in ritual. The Puritan, the Calvinist, the Lutheran were inimical to art and to exuberant beauty. The Catholic was a friend of him who professed to interpret or divulge the beautiful. Could he assert that his own aristocratic intelligence and passion for supremely satisfying order in all the fervors of artistic creation were not purely Catholic qualities? The ambassadors did not labor this point. Next.
Besides, they said, it is a mark of the modern spirit to be shy in the presence of all absolute statements. However sure you may be now of the reasonableness of your convictions, you cannot be sure that you will always think them reasonable. If you sincerely regard a pledge as an infringement of human liberty, you cannot pledge yourself against following a reactionary impulse which is certain to overtake you someday. You cannot leave out of sight the possibility that your views of the world will change to such an extent that you will regard all interference with the course of affairs as the part of such as can still be deluded by hope. In that case, what will have become of your life? You will have wasted it in efforts to save people who have neither inclination nor aptitude for freedom. You believe in an aristocracy, believe also in the eminence of the aristocratic class and in the order of society which secures that eminence. Do you imagine that manners will become less ignoble, intellectual and artistic endeavor less conditioned, if the ignorant, enthusiastic, spiritual Slovens whom we have subject us? Not one of those Slovens understands your aims as an artist or wants your sympathy. We, on the contrary, understand your aims and often are in sympathy with them, and we solicit your support and consider your comradeship an honor. You are fond of saying that the absolute is dead. If that be so, it is possible that we are all wrong, and if once you accept that as a possibility, what remains for you but an intellectual disdain? Next, please.
With us, you can exercise your contemptuous faculties when you are recognized as one of the patrician order, and you will not even be obliged to grant a truce to the very doctrines, the success of which in the world has secured your patricianship. Make one with us. Your life will be insured from grosser troubles. Your art will be safeguarded against the intrusions of revolutionary notions which no artist of whom history tells us has ever made himself champion. Make one with us on equal terms. In temper and in mind, you are still a Catholic. Catholicism is in your blood. Living in an age which possesses to have discovered evolution, can you be fatuous enough to think that simply by being wrong-headed, you can recreate entirely your mind and temper, or can clear your blood of what you may call the Catholic infection? A revolution such as you desire is not brought about by violence, but gradually. And within the church, you have an opportunity of beginning your revolution in a rational manner. You can sow the seeds in the careful furrows entrusted to you. And if your seed is good, it will prosper. But by going into the unnecessary wilderness and scattering your seed broadcast on all soils, what harvest will you have? Everything seems to urge you to a course of moderation, of forbearance, and the purified will can surely display itself quite as well in acceptance as in rejection. The trees do not resent autumn, nor does any exemplary thing in nature resent its limitations. Neither then do you resent the limitations of compromise. Next, please.
These pleadings with Stephen, so punctiliously heard out, were supplemented by Cranley's influence. Neither of the young men was studying for his examination, and they spent their evening as usual in aimless walking and talking. Their walks and talks led nowhere because whenever anything definite threatened to make its appearance in their talk, Cranley promptly sought the company of some of his chosen companions. The billiard room of the Adelphi Hotel was now a favored resort of the two friends. After 10 o'clock every night, they went into the billiard room. It was a big room, well furnished with ill-kept, inelegant tables, and poorly furnished with players. Cranley played protracted matches with one or other of his companions, while Stephen sat on the seat that ran alongside the table. A game of 50 cost 6 pence, which was duly paid by each of the players in equal parts. Cranley, producing his 3 pence, was very deliberately from a leather heart-shaped purse. The players sometimes sent their balls on to the floor, and Cranley occasionally swore at his flamin' cue. There was a bar attached to the billiard room. In the bar was a stout barmaid who wore badly made stays, served bottles of stout with her head on one side, and conversed in an English accent with her customers about the theatrical companies of the different theaters. Her customers were young men who carried their hats sideways, far back on their heads, and walked with their feet apart. Their trousers were usually turned up high above their boots. One of the regular customers at this bar, though he did not mix with the young gentleman mentioned above, was a friend of Cranley's, a young man who was a clerk in the Agricultural Board office. Next, please.
He was a bandy-legged little man who spoke very little when he was sober, but very much when he was drunk. When he was sober, he was very orderly, but his tipsiness, signaled by a dark-colored ooze upon his pock-marked face, was boastful and disorderly. One night he engaged in a fierce argument about Tim Healy with a thick-set medical student who had a taste for the art of self-defense. The argument was nearly entirely one-sided, inasmuch as the medical student's contributions were derisive laughs and such remarks as, is he handy with the mitts? Can he put up with his props? Is he a good man with his mitts? At last, the clerk from the Agricultural Board office called the medical student a dirty name, whereupon the medical student immediately knocked down all the drinks on the counter in his efforts to smash the offender. The barmaid ran screaming for the proprietor. The medical student was soothed and restrained by considerate friends, and the offender was escorted out by Cranley and Stephen and a few others. At first he lamented that his new cuffs were stained with porter and expressed a great desire to go back and fight it out. But dissuaded by Cranley, he began to tell Stephen in an indistinct undertone that he had got the highest marks in pure mathematics ever given in the degree examination. He advised Stephen to go to London to write for the papers and said he could put him in the right way to get on. When Cranley had begun a conversation with the others concerning the interrupted game of billiards, Stephen's companions again announced that he had got the highest marks ever given in the degree in pure mathematics. Next.
Are we continuing on? I don't mind. Yeah.
Bill? What happened to Bill?
Should we stop here?
Everyone else happy? Yeah, we could stop here.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, because we won't get to the end.
We need to leave something for the next night.
Right.
This is true.
okay.
208.
Yeah,
Well,
because we'll finish next week then.
Yeah.
yeah.
Should do.
But we'll finish with plenty of time left over. So are we going to start anything else?
Aha.
Yeah.
Good
A
question.
good question. We have raised this question many times.
Indeed, we
Well,
have,
we
and
do.
we haven't found a satisfactory answer.
Well, I think one of the things I thought we had kind of decided on reading the two pieces by Yeats that were mentioned.
That's what I
Yeah.
thought too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what are they? I missed that.
The Adoration of the Magi and the Tables of the Law. Not in that order, but yeah, those two.
Mm. That's
It might be worthwhile to read that whole book that features Michael Robartes that Yeats published in 1897, I think it was.
These are both in the same book, Bill?
Yes.
Mhm.
And what's the name of the book?
Oops.
Well, it's collected in his mythologies, which
Okay.
Okay.
contains a lot of other material, but
One of them is the Adoration of the Magi,
Yes,
And the other, and what's the
That's the
first
second
one?
part.
the tables of the law.
That's it. Okay.
Let me see if I can find the contents again. So they appeared in a book that Yeats released called Rosa Alchemica, and the full title is Rosa Alchemica: The Tables of the Law and the Adoration of the Magi. So it has all three, and it was published in 1897. So we might consider starting with Rosa Alchemica and just reading all three of them.
How do you spell Alchemica?
Alchemica.
Yeah, it's like a.
That all three are about, let's see, 33, 45, 55, about 65 pages, 64 pages for all three of them. So that would be 3 sessions, maybe. So I would say we could do one in each session. Might make sense.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to read Yeats.
Yeah.
Particularly since they made such an impression on Joyce at this time. Now,
Yeah.
later on, he kind of disavowed Yeats and his writing, but at the time he's writing Stephen Hero, or the time he's writing about in Stephen Hero, he had really they had made a really big impression on him and colored a lot of his thinking at the time. So I think there's some value in looking at them.
Yep.
Interesting.
You can get it for free on Kindle.
Yeah, I'm sure it's available
Perfect.
in a lot of different sources, but
And is there a special order that they should be read, Bill?
they appear when Yeats published them. They appeared in that order: Rosa Alchemica, the Tables of the Law,
Perfect.
and the Adoration of the Magi. But
Excellent.
again, Joyce only mentions the latter two. He doesn't. I don't think he mentions Rosa Alchemica. At least I don't remember it. But
I don't think he does either.
no,
Yeah,
No.
we talked about it before.
yeah, but
Are they prose texts?
it's all prose.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Great.
That's wonderful.
Okay.
Be interesting.
So our next reading, that we'll have some time left over, but we'll have time to maybe talk about the entire book.
Yeah.
Stephen, a little bit,
Yeah.
I'm glad.
and maybe go back and pick out some parts that were particularly memorable or insightful, or I don't know, whatever you want to say,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe save Yeats for the following week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think so.
Whatever you
Yeah.
guys want to do is okay, as long as we keep going.
Exactly.
We keep
Yes.
going.
Our poor Stephen was lucky he wasn't arrested. The way he followed Emma. He was completely blinded. He really sees the world so differently from everybody else.
So, another kind of girl than Emma might just have said, "Oh, you're a bold one," and then taken his hand and led him into the bushes. But maybe
There's an old
someone like Laura
joke.
Barnacle. What's that?
There's an old joke that ends with the punchline after a man does just this, and his friend says to him, "Don't you get slapped a lot?" And he says, "Yeah, but I get laid a lot too."
Excellent.
A price to pay.
Exactly. That was brilliant.
Okay.
I have a tender heart for all humankind, the things we suffer for love.
Oh my God.
That was great. You get such a good insight into how his mind worked, I think. And there's
I think so too.
25.
What we read tonight, though, I thought was particularly dense.
Yeah,
And-
I was just saying exactly what I was going to say. I'll have to go back over it again.
But you could see that's how his own mind was operating. He was serious about his meditations on all of these things, to the point of obsession. Maybe he was a maniac in a way.
Certainly, his criticism of Catholicism as vermin was very, very strong. I was struck by that passage. You know, it becomes clearer in subsequent Joyce works, but this is the first time that I think it has been articulated so clearly. It's a wonder he wasn't banned just for that alone.
But he gives the I mean, he really does look at it logically, and he does really consider the argument that, well, you might do better within the church to further your mission, if your mission really is art and the creation of beauty. It might serve you better to not abandon the church, but to go along with it.
Yes.
And I honestly think he did consider that. I think he really looked at both sides of the question, all sides of the question.
Yeah.
And then came to an understanding that no, he couldn't. That was not who he was. He couldn't. I will not serve, non serviam.
But there had to be huge pressure on him to serve.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's much easier nowadays not to serve, but at that time, the peer pressure must have been huge.
And he gets it from Cranley. He gets it from Lynch. He gets it from everybody. He gets it from Emma.
And also the college.
Yeah, the college.
It was a Catholic college.
And McCann, all of them. McCann seems to be, to me, to really exemplify that notion of working within the church. McCann seems to be, so all right, so we'll get a paper, we'll write something, we'll do something. Might not be, it might not be everything we want, but we'll make a little bit of progress, So that's kind of that position that Joyce was meditating about working within the church. Wouldn't have the freedom, but he might accomplish a little. And I think ultimately, obviously, he couldn't settle for that.
Yeah.
I thought the section on the limitations of marriage was very interesting.
Oh,
yeah.
See, and that's the interesting part. We wouldn't, without this manuscript having survived and then ultimately being published. I mean, it may have been in a library, in a museum or a library collection somewhere where people could go and read it. But the fact that it was published in a book is so brilliant because it tells us so much about his relationship with Nora, about his entire life, that we really wouldn't be able to. We could imagine, but not with the certainty that he gives us.
And he depicts it so clearly and crisply. It's a really wonderful document to have.
Yep.
Well, the whole process of his thoughts and the originality of the thoughts and the confrontation they had with the thinking around him is extraordinary.
Yeah, you can feel the internal conflict as you read, because you sway this way with him and that way.
Yeah. Mm,
Amazing to be able to put it down on paper.
yes.
Remarkable.
Absolutely.
Well, he really did it in a fevered state. I mean, it was like, again, it was an obsession of his at the time when he first got to Trieste. Every spare moment he was writing this. I mean, to write out 1,000 pages in longhand, pen and ink, dipping your pen each time, and then having another thought, crossing it out, writing, it's amazing.
No word processor.
Yeah.
Mm.
Astonishing.
Good job. He had red crayons.
Yeah, the crayons. And it's I still feel like I'm listening to a 19-year-old, 20-year-old. I'm listening probably to my 19-year-old self in many ways, and my friends at that time, and they come back to mind.
Likewise.
That's very true in The Artist as well, Joe. Portrait of the Artist.
Yes, that's right. But
that's what struck me. Yeah, that's what struck me forcibly. First time out, I read the Portrait of the Artist when I was in college, and it seemed to be about a younger self by a couple of years.
Yeah.
But it's
And
true.
that description of walking with Emma from leaving Stephen's Green to South Circular Road, they said nothing. That's quite a long distance to go with someone and not say a word.
Mm-hmm.
It was what the Catholic Church called an occasion of sin.
Of course, yeah. I wonder, did he walk up Harcourt Street? I don't know where. Obviously, they see a tram crossing the ridge of the bridge, so that has to be a bridge along the canal. The only bridges there: Rathmines, Portobello Bridge, or Charlemont Bridge. And I find it hard. The buildings have changed so much there. I don't know where the mall was. I think that might be Charlemont Mall. It's now gone.
Yeah.
And it's kind of strange because that's my route into town when I walk into town on a Saturday. I walk by sort of
crossings of the river.
People's Way, Emma.
But you're very lucky to be able to actually visualize where he is walking, because I was trying to do that. I was trying to figure out what bridge was he talking about.
Yeah, I think it's guess it was Bridge. That's. I mean, I'm probably projecting my own walks onto the book.
That's lovely.
Mhm.
I love that.
It's one of the advantages of living in Dublin, all right?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you think of all these people who lived before you and walked these streets and had felt such passions. You're inclined to think you're the only person who ever felt strongly about anything.
My ancestors on my paternal side all come from the center of the city. Yeah. So, like you, Joe, I find that when I'm reading Joyce, that I'm thinking about them walking these same streets.
Yeah, me too. My on my father's side, they're city center dubs.
Yeah,
and
which was a small place,
Oh yeah, my ancestors probably knew yours.
I thought you were going to say they knew Joyce.
Let's not probe that in case we find something terrible.
It's funny.
I'm gonna have to leave you guys. So see you all next week.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
it was wonderful.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, will I end?
Like we're saying good night, are we?
I think we're saying bye.
Ihawa.
Ihawa. Ihawa.
Ihawa.
See you.
Igua.
Yes.
Thanks. Thanks,
See you,
everybody.
Duncan, if you're there.
It was great. Bye.